The year is 1177 BC. Across the eastern Mediterranean, every major power that has ruled for centuries sends the same message to their allies. 3 words repeated in desperate clay tablets. The enemy comes. Within 50 years, almost every great Bronze Age civilization will be gone. The Hittite Empire erased, Mycenaean Greece abandoned, the mighty cities of the Levant burned to ash. This is not mythology. This is not gradual decline. This is civilizational apocalypse, and we still don't fully understand what caused it. Imagine the ancient world at its peak. The Mediterranean is a highway of trade connecting empires that have stood for half a millennium. Egyptian pharaohs exchanged letters with Hittite kings as equals, negotiating marriages between royal families. Mycenaean Greeks build palaces with indoor plumbing and advanced accounting systems. Merchants from Cyprus carry copper ingots stamped with their maker's mark across seas, protected by treaties that have kept peace for generations. The world is more interconnected than it will be again for over 1,000 years. Then everything breaks. The first warnings arrive at the palace of Ugarit, a wealthy port city on the Syrian coast. The king receives a letter from the ruler of Cyprus. Ships have been sighted. Not merchant vessels, war galleys, dozens of them, possibly hundreds, carrying warriors the Cypriots cannot identify. The letter ends with a plea: send help immediately. We are in terrible danger. Ugarit's king writes back. He has no ships to send. His entire navy is stationed in Hittite territory to the north, fighting someone else's war. His army is scattered across the countryside. The city is defenseless. This is the last letter found in Ugarit's archives. Within weeks, archaeologists believe the city burns. The palace collapses. 1,500 years of continuous habitation end in a single day of violence. Walk through the ruins today, and you can still see how suddenly it happened. Pottery kilns left with vessels half-fired. A clay tablet sitting in the palace archive, the scribe's message incomplete. Weapons forged but never distributed to defenders. This was not siege. This was not conquest. This was annihilation so swift that no one had time to prepare. And Ugarit is just the beginning. To understand what made this collapse so catastrophic, you need to understand how sophisticated these Bronze Age kingdoms had become. The palace at Pylos in Greece maintained records of everything. Scribes tracked perfume production, bronze allocation, religious offerings, even the exact number of rowers needed for the fleet. Archaeologists have found tablets listing women workers, organized by skill, assigned to specific textile production quotas. This is not primitive society. This is complex bureaucracy managing an economy that spans the Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire controls Anatolia from a capital carved into living rock. Their treaties are so detailed that historians use them to reconstruct the entire political structure of the late Bronze Age. When the Hittite king writes to the Egyptian pharaoh, he addresses him as brother. These are superpowers that have learned to coexist through diplomacy, trade, and carefully balanced military threat. Egyptian records describe a world of luxury that makes modern wealth look modest. A single royal wedding between Egypt and Mitanni involves a dowry that includes thousands of servants, entire workshops of craftsmen, and so much gold that it takes multiple tablets just to inventory it all. Trade routes stretch from Afghanistan, bringing lapis lazuli, to the Atlantic coast of Spain, bringing tin for bronze. The palace at Knossos on Crete processes more economic transactions in a year than some medieval kingdoms. This interconnected world has a fatal weakness. When one part fails, everything connected to it begins to collapse. The invasions, when they come, arrive as something the ancient world has never seen before. Egyptian inscriptions call them the Sea Peoples, though that name tells us almost nothing. These are not a single army. They are a migration of entire populations moving by land and sea, destroying everything in their path. Men, women, children, traveling with ox carts and ships, burning cities not for conquest, but for survival. Egyptian temple walls show them in battle. Feathered headdresses, round shields, long swords, ships with bird-headed prows. The Egyptians claim victory, but the inscriptions reveal something terrifying. These invaders have already destroyed the Hittite Empire before they reach Egypt. They have crushed Cyprus. They have burned the coastal cities of Canaan. Egypt stands alone, the last Bronze Age superpower still standing, facing an enemy that has toppled every other great kingdom. Pharaoh Ramesses III fights them to a standstill in the Nile Delta. His victory inscription is one of the most important historical documents we possess. The countries that came from their islands in the midst of the sea, they advanced on Egypt. No land stood before them, beginning with Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia. They were cut off. A camp was set up in Amma. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. Read those words carefully. The greatest empire in Anatolia gone, the wealthy port of Carchemish gone, Cyprus devastated, and Egypt, for all its victory, never fully recovers. But who were the sea peoples, and why did they migrate with such violence? Modern archaeology suggests they were not invaders in the traditional sense. They were refugees. Climate data from tree rings and ice cores shows that the eastern Mediterranean experienced a severe drought starting around 1200 BC. Crops failed. Pasturelands dried up. Populations that had lived for generations in marginal territories suddenly faced starvation. At the same time, the interconnected palace economies began to fail. Mycenaean Greece shows signs of crisis decades before the final collapse. The elaborate bureaucracy that tracked everything started to break down. Literacy declined. Trade networks fractured. Some historians believe the palace systems had become too centralized, too fragile. When drought reduced agricultural yields, the palaces could not feed the populations they controlled. People abandoned the cities, not because of invasion, but because staying meant death. The invasions and migrations were the result of collapse, not the cause. Starving populations moved toward areas that still had resources. They fought not for empire, but for survival. And because the Bronze Age world was so interconnected, the collapse of one region triggered cascading failures everywhere else. Recent excavations at Lachish in Israel reveal the violence of these final years. A massive destruction layer covers the late Bronze Age city. Buildings burned so intensely that mud bricks vitrified into glass, bodies left where they fell, arrowheads embedded in walls. This pattern repeats across dozens of sites: Hazor, Megiddo, Mycenae, Turin, Troy. The archaeological record shows the same thing everywhere: fire, abandonment, collapse. The Bronze Age world ends not with a bang, but with hundreds of bangs spread across decades. By 1100 BC, the palace civilizations are gone. Writing disappears from Greece for 3 centuries. The trade networks that brought tin from Afghanistan and copper from Cyprus disintegrate. The Eastern Mediterranean enters what historians call the Dark Ages, a period where population plummets, technology regresses, and the sophisticated world of the Bronze Age becomes distant memory, preserved only in epic poems like the Iliad. But here is what makes the Bronze Age collapse truly fascinating for modern historians. We have the receipts, we have the letters, we have the last desperate messages between kings who could not save each other. The tablet from the king of Ugarit to the king of Alashia reads like something from a disaster movie. As for the matter about which you wrote to me, saying the enemy ships have been sighted at sea, well now, even if it is true that the ships have been sighted, be strong. For indeed, the enemy is here before me, and my cities have been burned by fire, and they have committed abominable acts in my country. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is real correspondence between real rulers watching their world end. The king of Ugarit knows his city is doomed. He is writing to explain why he cannot send the help his ally desperately needs. Both kingdoms will be destroyed. Both kings likely died in the violence that followed. The Bronze Age collapse teaches us that civilization is more fragile than we imagine. The interconnected palace economies of the late Bronze Age were more sophisticated than anything Europe would see again until the Renaissance. They had international law, diplomatic immunity, trade standardization, and peace maintained through complex alliances. And it all came apart in 2 generations. Climate change disrupted agriculture. Economic centralization made societies unable to adapt. Migrations turned violent when resources ran out. The very interconnection that made the Bronze Age world prosperous made it vulnerable. When one part failed, everything connected to it collapsed. Standing in the ruins of Mycenae today, you can see the massive cyclopean walls built to protect a city that was never successfully invaded by external armies. The destruction came from within, from systems that could not sustain themselves when conditions changed. The palaces were abandoned not because enemies conquered them, but because no one remained who could maintain the complex bureaucracy needed to run them. 3,000 years later, we live in a world even more interconnected than the Bronze Age Mediterranean. Our supply chains span the globe. Our economies depend on stability in regions we may never visit. Our climate is changing. The Bronze Age collapse is not ancient history. It is a mirror showing us what happens when complex systems face stresses they were not designed to handle. Those ancient kingdoms believed they would last forever. Their kings built monuments to eternity. And in less than a human lifetime, almost everything they created turned to ash and rubble. The sea peoples remain mysterious. Were they Mycenaean refugees, Anatolian populations fleeing Hittite collapse, a confederation of Mediterranean peoples driven by desperation? We may never know for certain. What we do know is that they were us, humans facing catastrophe, trying to survive, and in their survival, destroying the last remnants of a dying world. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that progress is not inevitable. Civilization is not permanent. The greatest empires of their age, kingdoms that controlled millions of people and dominated the known world, vanished so completely that for centuries afterward, people living in their ruins believed the massive walls and palaces must have been built by giants. History is not a straight line upward. It is a story of rise and fall, of fragility disguised as permanence, of systems that seem eternal right up until the moment they cease to exist.